বৰঠাকুৰ IS একাডেমি প্ৰস্তুতি আৰু অধ্যয়নৰ নিৰ্ভৰযোগ্য ঠিকনা।
Hello everyone, welcome to the Hindu analysis for 21 July 2021. Let us begin with the first article today. 2/3 of Indians have antibodies, so shows ICMR survey. So the ICMR has conducted a new sero survey across India, and according to their numbers, 2/3 of the population that is aged above 6 years have antibodies against SARS-CoV-2. This was the data that they released and the sero survey they conducted as of I think in June and July of this year. Now, 2/3 of the population according to their study have antibodies. Now the concern comes into the picture of the rest of the population, that is third of the population, which amounts to around 40 crore people. Now 40 crore people according to their own study are still vulnerable to COVID-19 infection, and we don't know what end would be the percentage or the severity of infection in the 40%. So this percentage is through a combination of both infection, people who got infected with COVID-19 then recovered, and then they developed through that process they developed antibodies, and also people who got vaccinated for COVID-19. Again, this is a national sero survey. This is not a substitute for a survey that should be conducted at state level or a district level, because there are a lot of variations when you go into that kind of a survey, which is particularly specific towards a district or a state. Again, we are still very much amidst COVID-19 pandemic, despite things looking better with the waning of the second wave of COVID-19. If we are not careful again, if we are not against social or any kind of congregations or non-essential travel or whatever it may be, we are going to see a resurgence of COVID-19 again. Because for all we know, second wave might not be the end of it in India, as we have been discussing in the past few months or so, where third wave, even before the second wave began, we were talking about second and third waves, right? During the peak of second wave also, we were worried about what would happen if the second wave itself is this deadly, what would be the case in the third wave. So again, all the protocols must be followed. If you have a chance to get vaccinated, please do get vaccinated. If anybody in your family, as you are preparing for civil services, it should be your job to ensure that people don't have that apprehensions against vaccines. If you have anybody surrounding you who are still skeptical of getting vaccinated, if they are eligible, please do try to allay their fears through explaining the process, the advantages, also explain them what are the disadvantages, and show them the difference between why advantages outweigh the disadvantages, and please try to get them vaccinated. So that should be one thing that you can do while you are preparing for your civil services examination. Now again, 2/3 is a good number, but nonetheless remember, still 40 crore. This is a small sample survey, but nonetheless a legitimate one. So we have a lot more to cover and be safe about. Now moving on to the next article, spy in hand. Now yesterday we discussed about what Pegasus software is, what are spywares in the perspective of both science and technology aspect, and the polity aspect of it, where Article 19 and Article 21 were under threat because of freedom of expression, freedom of thought, or right to privacy and all. We have to be very careful in discussing this issue, because it is going to be in the news for a long period of time, because yesterday the proceedings of the houses was also disrupted because of discussions on this, as the matter of or the situation is such that it goes against the ideals of a democracy. So we have to be very careful and allocate a little bit of more concentration when we discuss this Pegasus issue right now. Now we covered what is the technology aspect of it, or the science and technology aspect of it. We also covered what are the legal aspects of it, where the government has the legitimacy to carry out surveillance on citizens using the Telegraph Act or the IT Act. So we know that the government has this rules with them that allow them to surveil on an individual person based on the necessity in the scheme of national security. Now currently the allegations are such that the software has been used as a surveillance tool to curtail dissent, to curtail freedom of speech, and it amounts to violation of privacy, right? Now the government came out and said that there is no illegal surveillance possible in India, and they said that there are legal provisions for intercepting communication and accessing digitally stored information in the interest of national security and public safety. Now again, when we discuss this, it's always in democracy. It should be very clear as to who can surveil on whom, and there has to be clear oversight on who is surveilling and how they are surveilling and what were the reasons behind it. Without oversight, arbitrary, and let us be clear, any kind of politically motivated surveillance is kind of bad for democracy. At the core of it, it is the strength of democracy that should prevail over any other situation. Now, the government has clearly said that they are not conducting any kind of illegal surveillance, and they do, if they want, they have legal provisions through the IT Act and the Telegraph Act. Now, what is the center of this is one aspect is the democracy aspect. The second is violation of a privacy, and whatever the information that they might have obtained through similar methods, not only this, but any other kind of surveillance which is illegal and arbitrary, might sabotage elections, might sabotage opposition campaigns, even dislodge opposition governments. In one case, there was an accusation made that a sitting judge of Supreme Court was being surveilled, or for whatever reason, it goes against and reduces this belief in the institutions, right? Remember, uh, you are a good person, right? Let us say you are a very good person, you are a person of good character, but there is a reality out there where certain people might choose to create a misinformation campaign or try to misalign you by slinging accusations in the public, and you have to be very careful of what kind of a perception exists out there in regarding you. If there is any accusation, you know you are a clear person, you know you are a good person, you didn't do any harm to anybody, but outside of your family there is a perception that you are a very bad individual. Now at that point of time, if you are an individual of good character, what would you do is you come out and say that these allegations are false, this is the proof, these are the things that I would try to strengthen my image in the public. The same thing is happening in the case of the government, right? The government also must try to come out and clearly put out their facts in the public domain, try to clear any air that is currently clouding the institutions themselves, and say that we didn't do this. If and when we did this, these were the reasons that we did it, these were kind of the convictions that we got out of it, or there were no convictions to be made in the first place itself. Whatever the information that we acted upon kind of turned out to be a minuscule one, so we had to abandon the investigation at the initial stages itself. And to prevent further similar things happening in the future, we are introducing these kinds of legislation, these kinds of checks and balances, where we'll initiate a parliamentary committee, where we'll initiate a committee comprising of senior Supreme Court judges to oversee such kinds of provisions or such kinds of requests in the future, so that there is a clear oversight process, there is a clear legal process and an due process that one officer or one government entity would require to go through before they attain the permission to surveil an individual for whatever reason. It may be the national security aspect. See, at the end of it, if it is a matter of national security, the government must and should in many cases surveil an individual, right? That is an importance of public order and public safety. Nobody is questioning that aspect. Questions are being raised when it is being done to kind of have an upper hand over somebody else for a personal use kind of a thing. Again, truth must always be at the forefront of any discussion, right? You have to kind of start a joint parliamentary committee, as I said, not only for the oversight in the future, also right now to clear out all the misunderstandings or the misinformation that is circulating right now. The government must come out and say that yes, this allegation is going to be investigated by a joint parliamentary committee, or we are going to appoint a government Supreme Court judge or any other credible mechanism, and we are going to start investigating from our end of the spectrum, meaning we are not going to go out of the way to investigate their reporting. We are going to clear things from our end so that we'll have a clear path towards what the truth is. Now, that is why we have to be very careful in discussing these things. Now, because at the end of the day, surveillance is bad. Without any oversight is always bad. That might turn into a tool for people who want to oppress somebody or abuse somebody. So, A clear-cut procedure, legislature, or protocol is required to conduct surveillance in India. That is the need of the hour. So again, we discussed what the legal provisions are under the Constitution of India, what are the acts or provisions that the government of India has to carry out surveillance in any case, and in the cases of national security and public order alone, and what are the pitfalls also. Pitfalls is we don't have a clear procedure as who has the authority or who is overseeing the surveillance, right? When we discussed about the right to privacy thing or the personal data protection laws also, the first thing that come to as far as the questions that were raised was that, okay, you give authority to one individual who has the ability to surveil on somebody, then who is overseeing that person? What are his credentials? What is his role in the governance or the government structure itself? So that also comes into the picture. Everything has to be very clearly defined and precise, because when we talk about such laws, lack of clear definitions is where people tend to skirt the issue altogether. They kind of have their own interpretation of the law itself, and they try to justify their acts whether they are legal or illegal, particularly in the case if their action is completely illegal. That is why when we try to discuss these kinds of issues, you have to always say and be specific as to what are the defined boundaries beyond which you must not go and within which you have to operate under. That is why surveillance laws must be clearly defined and put for the public consumption. Then only we can say this is my right, beyond this I cannot go. This is a little bit of a complicated issue, but again, we have a clear understanding of the science aspect of it, the technology aspect of it, and the legal aspect of it. As far as the moral thing, again we discussed, it is again a detrimental to a democracy. The government must come out and clearly put out their facts for public so that they clear any air that is currently hanging over its neck. So moving on to the next article, SC annuls part of cooperative amendment. Now in 2012, the constitution was amended for 97th time. During this amendment, new parts were introduced, and through these parts, certain terms for how to run a cooperative society was dictated. Not only that, certain 42nd amendment was also made to the directive principles of state policy regarding the cooperatives also. As I said, these were passed by the parliament without them getting ratified by the state legislative or state assemblies, because they are required to be ratified by the state legislature according to the Constitution of India. When they passed this, they not only determined how to run a cooperative society, they went to extent where they were determining the number of directors a society should have. Not only that, they also kind of dictated the tenure of the directors in the society and the necessary qualifications that a person must have in order to become a director of a cooperative society. So yesterday, in a major boost for federalism, the Supreme Court decided to strike down certain parts of the constitutional amendment, that is the 97th amendment that happened in 2012. Now what the amendment essentially did is it shrank the exclusive authority of state over its cooperative societies. Now cooperatives are stateless. States have supreme authority over they have the authority to run state corporations as they wish. They can form state cooperatives, they can dissolve state cooperatives, and they dictate the terms under which the state cooperatives run, right? But the 97th amendment, through its addition of new parts, kind of took away that kind of power from state governments and gave it to the central government. As I said, this was passed by the parliament but not ratified by the state legislature, which again was required by the constitution. Now the Supreme Court held that cooperative societies come under the exclusive legislative power of state legislature. It clearly defined what the central government did at that point of time is not right and kind of out of its jurisdiction or out of its bounds, because as far as the decisions or the control over cooperative societies exclusively comes under the state legislative power. Now, while all saying this, the Supreme Court also said that the central government has power over multi-state cooperative societies, because multi-state cooperative societies come under the central list. State cooperative societies come under the state list. So there is a clear distinction, right? Now, whatever the articles that the government of India introduced through its 97th amendment kind of impacted state powers or state control or state legislatures control over cooperative sector, particularly cooperative societies or cooperative sector altogether, right? The 97th amendment, which inserts the chapter dealing with cooperative societies, has not been so ratified by the states. Again, it hasn't been ratified by the state. Now, the one thing that the court did not do at this juncture is they did not strike down the portions of the part that was introduced during the amendment, that is particularly related to multi-state cooperative societies. Now, to conclude, simply the Supreme Court, in a absolute decision that actually improves the federal structure of Indian polity, clearly defined the central government's role in state cooperative societies and exclusively said that states have supremacy over what they do with their cooperative societies, and certain sections of the 97th amendment which took away that control from the state governments to the hands of the union government are not right, and we are removing those sections and we are giving back the control of state cooperative societies to state legislatures. Again, definition of who has the authority in which list. What happened essentially was that we know multi-state cooperative societies were in concurrent list, so central government had that supremacy. But cooperative societies, state cooperative societies particularly, were in state list, which meant that state governments have the supremacy. Now, what the 97th amendment essentially did was, by adding certain parts, it took away the power or authority from state governments and gave it to the union government. Now, the Supreme Court said that we are not going to touch the multi-state cooperative society aspect of the amendment, but what we are going to strike down or remove are the amendments that are regarded to the state cooperative societies, which prevented state governments or state legislatures acting independently with respect to their own state cooperatives. Again, this kinds of gives a shot in the arm for the federalism in India. Now, moving on, SC mulls over punishment for parties facing contempt. Now, in February of 2020, the Supreme Court gave a judgment stating that all the political parties must display or publicize the criminal records of their candidates before elections, and if they do not do that, so they might run the risk of getting the wrath of the Supreme Court, because they might find contempt punishment, or they may face contempt proceedings against them. During the hearing, the Supreme Court clearly said that if you don't follow, political parties, if you don't follow our judgment to publicize your candidates' criminal records, we are going to de-recognize your political symbol, and we are going to initiate contempt proceedings against you. So this was done before the Bihar poll, and the order was issued. Now, the political parties are actually facing contempt from the Supreme Court of India because they defied the Supreme Court judgment to declare or publicize the criminal record of their candidates. See, we are not talking about MPs or MLAs here. We are talking about the candidates that are being fielded by different parties in respective elections. The Supreme Court, one thing we have to agree is that Supreme Court has been doing a pretty good job of taking out or weeding out corruption from the politics in India. Their judgment and their track record in this particular regard has been exemplary. They have been boosting the Election Commission of India in so many ways that in the past 10-15 years particularly, the powers of ECI have gone up to good lengths. We introduced the electoral bonds, though there are certain spots in the electoral bond system, but nonetheless it is far better than what the situation was. And earlier we didn't have a clue about what was going on in the election process. Now we have a clear clarity and kind of openness in the entire process, where we know from the beginning to the end what the procedure is happening and how it is happening. Again, this time the Supreme Court said that See, corruption in politics is kind of the hallmark of Indian politics, right? Currently, according to a recent study, I think around 40% of MPs and for 26% of the number, I don't remember exactly, but close to 40% of our political leadership in central legislature kind of have criminal record, right? If we go into financial kind of crimes also, the number might drastically shoot up. Now we can clearly find relation between corruption in politics into corruption in governance, because at one point or the other time a corrupted politician who got kind of elected to a higher office in government might get linked up with a bureaucrat who kind of has that inclination, and they might kind of do anything illegal to fill their own pockets, right? It kind of has direct influence on the governance altogether. Now, one of the things that the Supreme Court order says that if any of your candidates have any kind of criminal background, you must make public aware of those charges. That was the essence of the order of Supreme Court Bihar before Bihar elections. Now, no party during that or the subsequent elections that took place did the or obey the orders of the Supreme Court of India. Every political party defied the Supreme Court orders. Now the Supreme Court is angry because what they asked was not being carried out. It is the Supreme Court of India, and they have the right or the authority to initiate contempt proceedings against all the parties who defied the Supreme Court order. Now, during this interaction, the Supreme Court was discussing how to punish the political parties that had not fully complied with the February 13th, 2020 judgment that they give. Look, the language itself shows that they are actually very serious about the issue. How to punish? They are sure that they are going to punish these people, but on what kind of punishment should be dealt out to these people? Now, again, despite bringing out criminal anecdotes in public domain, criminalization of politics has gone up. Yes, politics has become kind of a criminalized because people from criminal background are getting into politics, because at the end of the day, politics are kind of being marketed as this thing. If you have money, if you have clout, if you have the muscle power to gain or force some people into vote in such and such ways, you or your party or your candidate will win the election for sure. Because of that, elements which are associated with criminal activities are getting into politics because of the money, the clout, and the muscle power that they carry along with them. Now, again, the change has to come from the heart of the people. What we all want to see is that change should come to the system, and it will come. Again, that is the hope, right? The change is what everybody wants to see. But the problem is there are a lot of hurdles in the way. Now, one of the possible solutions is to increase the transparency, one thing, in the entire political process itself. The second thing is give more powers to the Election Commission of India. Right now, the Election Commission of India doesn't have any kind of power, in the sense if a party candidate or a political party doesn't adhere to the directions given by the Election Commission of India, the Election Commission of India cannot do anything apart from complaint it to the court or any other institution. If Election Commission of India has the same power as a court, then they might have the authority to initiate contempt proceedings against any candidate who did not adhere to their orders. But that, I think, should be the one of the possible ways that we can come out of this issue right now. The second thing is to limit the money that is being poured into elections, right? One of the best things that we can do is try to limit the election spending of political parties. That way we can ensure that the money flow that happens during any election might get reduced to a little extent, and that will have impact on how the electoral process is taking place. These are few suggestions, and I would suggest you to come up with more suggestions as to what should be the way forward in decriminalizing Indian political system. Now, moving on to the next article, India is welcome to join China's South Asia grouping. So let us discuss about China in the first instance. Let us look at China, how China has been dealing with the countries surrounding us. Now, recently there was a grouping called China South Asian countries Emergency Supplies Reserve and a Poverty Alleviation and Cooperative Development Center. Look at the countries that are in this grouping: China, Afghanistan, Bangladesh, Nepal, Pakistan and Sri Lanka. All these countries are our neighbors. And under what aegis are they clubbing together or forming a group together? Under the flagship of the Chinese initiative. Now the idea behind this particular grouping is that they want to help these countries, particularly Afghanistan, Bangladesh, Nepal, Sri Lanka and Pakistan, with vaccines, and they also want poverty alleviation programs to take place from the leadership of China, and also Cooperative Development Center. Now what is missing here is India. The other two countries are Maldives and Bhutan, definitely, but nonetheless the major player in the region itself is, one is China, the second is India, and in this grouping we are missing India. Now it appears like India has been left out wantingly, and that is absolutely true. Recently the External Affairs Minister of Bangladesh was asked why was India left out of this grouping. He clearly said that India can join this China-led South Asian initiative for COVID-19 vaccines and poverty alleviation at any point of time. So let us discuss what the issue here. China has been doing this thing since the beginning, right? China doesn't want India to rise up to or challenge its authority in the region or in the world. Now China has this tactic where they started this border thing and they don't want to settle. Let us be very clear. China doesn't want a solution to the border issue. One, they want almost all of our energies concentrated in the border area, so that we cannot challenge or try to counter China in any other paradigm or any other situation. When India's entire resources are allocated to one issue, what are the chances that India will have enough energy or enough resources to fight China in other domains? That is what China has been doing. So this is my personal opinion again. Even if we want to solve the border issue, the Chinese side at this point of time doesn't want to solve the border issue. It is actually more advantageous to them if we are engaged with them in the Ladakh area than the border issue settled. If the border issue is settled, it frees up a lot of resources and lot of energies from Indian side, and that is a threat to China from Chinese perspective. Now this grouping is also kind of a grouping that they are forming with other South Asian countries that surround us individually. They have this grouping with Sri Lanka, they have this grouping with Maldives also to a certain extent. When Soli government which is being guided by Mr. Nasheed came, they kind of moved away from it and kind of got back into Indian fold, but nonetheless there are a lot of challenges that are happening in Maldives also. The Pakistan issue is a non sequitur. We know how things are with Pakistan and how things can turn very bad for India in terms of Pakistan. That is given. Nepal also, we know what the situation is, and given the recent conclusion to the constitutional crisis that was brewing in, and subsequently we don't know whether Nepal will kind of come back into our fold or not, but given the situation, Nepal is kind of out of our reach right now. Even if they it's not like they are going to go back to old ways. They kind of saw the taste for it and they are going to stay that way for a long period of time, and India must try to calculate for those equations also. Now as far as Bangladesh and Afghanistan, they are also in a similar kind of situation. Now one of the negative things that happened during second wave of COVID-19 was that India could not supply vaccines to our neighbors, right? We could not fulfill the promises that we made through Vaccine Maitri or any other regional programs that we would supply vaccines to your countries. The moment India stopped supplying vaccines to these countries, China swooped in and took control of the situation. Look at the statement also, right? The statement of the foreign minister also says that the Chinese approached us at a time when we were in dire need of vaccines. They took our inability to supply vaccines to such a good advantage that they kind of shifted certain perceptions in these countries' societies. You can clearly say that our Vaccine Maitri or our inability through Vaccine Maitri had an impact on their vaccine supplies directly, and China converted it into their own advantage. Now, China has been approaching this strategy called minus India strategy. You are trying to de-link every neighbor in the region from India. In any grouping, let us look at the SAARC grouping or SCO grouping, any grouping in the South Asian region, China has been calculatedly trying to decouple India's engagement with those countries. They are trying to turn them either into hostiles or they are trying them to turn into non-cooperative states. So this has been the Chinese tactic in the society, in the region, and given the current situation that we have with them, China is actually using all the resources that it has in its basket right now to achieve the same in a much faster time, because it knows for a fact that India is engaged in Ladakh with much of its resources and less resources to spare to spend somewhere. Now that is this grouping, that is the China South Asia countries emergency supply reserve and a poverty alleviation and cooperation development center. This is a grouping that China is spearheading, again that excludes India specifically and has Afghanistan, Bangladesh, Nepal, Pakistan and Sri Lanka in the grouping. This was a similar thing that happened in Sri Lanka, where the Colombo terminal was gone, the Hambantota port also was gone, and as I said, this has been the tactic of China to decouple India from its neighbors. Thank you, stay safe, namaste.
বৰঠাকুৰ IS একাডেমি প্ৰস্তুতি আৰু অধ্যয়নৰ নিৰ্ভৰযোগ্য ঠিকনা।
বৰঠাকুৰ IAS একাডেমি।